Greetings, everyone, and welcome to the Drawing on Non-Western Traditions in Comics and Illustration panel. Oh, hi, Sloan. Oh my
Hi
goodness,
there.
fantastic. Hi. All right. Okay, we're ready to get started. Once again,
Yay.
welcome everyone. First off, I would like for everyone to just briefly introduce themselves, their pronouns, and their brief background, starting with Sloan.
For sure. I'm Sloan Leong. She, her, they, them works for me. I'm an artist, cartoonist, and writer. I have two graphic novels out and a bunch of short fiction, and you can find that just on my website. Yeah.
All right, that's so cool. Murewa?
Okay, my name is Muriwaya Dele, he, him. I'm a comic book writer from Nigeria. My recent comic book is with Action Lab Entertainment, New Men. Yeah, basically.
All right. Farid?
Hi everybody, I'm Farid, and I am from Malaysia. I am a disabled freelance illustrator and comic artist, and my latest published work is the comic Signals from the Sound Anthology, published by Difference Engine, and you can find my work at faridakes.xyz or faridakes on Twitter, Farid EACS.
All right, fantastic. And I'm the moderator, Jamie Lau, he, they, game art student, but it's okay. I'm just moderating, so it's fine. Okay, so I would like to start with I'd like to briefly cover what we'll be discussing during this panel. So we're going to be discussing non-Western versus Western narratives, and then techniques like artistic or writing or so on. And then we're going to talk a little bit about the industry and then open up questions to the audience, and then we can close at 12:50. I mean, where in 50 minutes. Is that all right? All right, cool. So before we begin, I'd like to present some context for the audience. So non-Western as like a term is a bit too vague and broad an area to address with just three people with specific backgrounds in this panel. So I would like to encourage the panelists to answer as personally and as specific as possible, especially if it makes these questions easier to answer. So you don't have the pressure of like, oh no, non-Western is not everyone. No, it's okay. Like that should be understood. Just answer from your own perspective because we're all non-Westerners. So yeah. And also when we say traditions in this context, we are not just covering cultural inheritance, but also like tropes or expectations of the genres and mediums in comic and illustration, public opinion, and so on in both Western and non-Western aspects of things. Is that okay?
Yep.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. Then okay, I'll just briefly cover the panel procedure. So when we talk among each other, I like really a conversational flow going, but we don't want to rudely cut people off, if we get too excited or anything. So if one of us wants to add on to each other, we can just raise our hand, and then I will, as the moderator, be like, "Oh, would you like to say something?" Or you can say, "May I interrupt?" and so on. And also, if someone asks an inappropriate question, because this is a topic about culture and sensitivity and whatnot, you can just respond with, "I would rather you not ask me that." And if you choose to explain why it's inappropriate, you can. But if not, I'll just say, "All right, then let's move on." Is that understood?
Yep.
Is that clear? All right, amazing. Let's start. Okay. First off, I'd like everyone to talk a bit more about their work, starting with Sloan. In particular, while you're describing your work to us, could you tell us about your inspirations and what part of your work defines itself as non-Western to you?
Yeah, that's a good
Oh,
question.
oh wait.
Oh, go
Also,
ahead.
I'm sorry. You can share screen as well if that's easier for you. So it's like you can show your work and you can drop like links in the chat and I'll put it on the Discord. I'm so sorry. Yeah.
No, that's okay. That's all right. I won't be doing slides just because I didn't have time, but I will drop links to like the comics I talk about later. But
Mm,
yeah, I would say my work is I consider it um kind of on the outskirts of Western tropes and traditions. I feel like with a lot of indigenous and marginalized identities, we do something that's kind of like a sort of like double voicing where we're kind of using our like colonizers' language and tropes, but also critiquing it at the same time. I think that's really pretty common in like Native American literature, and I try and engage in that as well because I also feel like I'm of mixed ancestry, so I'm not like, you know, not to, get all up in like blood quantum topics or whatever, but we're all we all have very sticky, complex identities. So yeah, there's a lot of things that I try and bring in. I like to focus on community rather than like a single protagonist or hero. I find that very like tiresome, very tiresome Western trope. And also things like resolutions at the end of stories. I also don't really care for those that much. Like I prefer characters that are going to like need to continue to like either work on themselves or like work with the world, and nothing is ever really complete. That's yeah, those are some elements that are in my work.
All right, that's really great. Thank you for sharing. Farid, could you tell us a bit about your inspirations and what of your work defines itself as non-Western to you personally?
A lot of my work revolves around the idea of identity and belonging, and also like the intricacies of like your identity as well, especially as someone who is disabled, queer, of color, and of faith. Many of these intersecting things can come in conflict with one another in these communities. So a lot of my inspiration comes from like a lot of my local artists. For example, we have Lat, Muhammad Nobi Muhammad Khalid. His work is very much about the Malay identity and the Malaysian identity in particular. And I take a lot of inspiration not only from his line work but also from his storylines as well. And more no non-Western artists include Junji Ito. Of course, he's known mostly for his horror. One of my favorites of the series is Gyo. And I admire how he shapes horror both in body horror and also like psychologically as well, and they can mesh well with like the idea of identity in, and I do take inspiration from that. And finally, a lesser known artist I took inspiration from around my teens is Nizam Bacho, and I really adore his work because he is Malay Jawa like me and also from Johor like me. And as you can see here, there's a bunch of like Javanese masks on this cover. This one more of his more recent works, and it also explores a lot about the local mythos as well. So I take a lot of inspiration from the local work here, in order to express my work in both my illustration and also my comics.
That is really insightful. Thank you for sharing. Murewa, please go and introduce your work to us. And yeah,
Okay. When it comes to the inspiration for my work, it can be a little complicated because I think starting off in comic books, it starts off with a sort of rejection of my society of some sort. Um, One of the things you would probably face if you're in Nigeria is, for example, you have a terrorist group that's here, and an increasing lack of security and everything. So there's always this pressure, there's always this fear that you're not safe. So, and a lot of my books kind of revolve around that lack of safety itself. It's usually a totalitarian government of some sort, and there's usually not a single protagonist, and a lot of the characters could leave the story at any time. At any time, so those are one of those things that kind of bounces off how I feel, and that constant dread you feel when you're here. And but then a little, it's been metamorphosizing into more of an exception. New Men is based on that rejection, but a lot of the books and animation I've been working on, which are still in the development phase, which I can't share too much, it's now more on accepting that, okay, I think I'm good. Um, it's a complex relationship I have with the community around me. That's the dread, and then there's the acceptation of it. So a lot of my work now revolves around the African mythology, and yeah, the gods and stuff. And I try to, I like it, and I like the kind of stories they tell. and it's starting to reflect more in my work.
All right. Thank you everyone for sharing. As everyone can see, like our
Deep.
upbringings really shape. Oh yes, sorry. Yes, sorry.
Sorry,
Go on.
I just want to add real quick, Mariwa. I can definitely relate to that feeling of like dread and lack of safety in a totalitarian government. I think Jamie can relate as well, especially with how the Malaysian politics are happening right now. And I think it's really inspiring to hear that from you and seeing that we have a lot of shared experiences as well.
Yeah,
Mm.
thank you for it.
It is true. A lot of what we experience in our respective backgrounds really shape our work, and like you can really see that like across everyone. I honestly thank you everyone for sharing. So to bounce off of that, how do we feel like about narrative aspects in Western or non-Western comics and illustration that make it inaccessible to either audience? Like, yeah. So starting with perhaps Murwa?
I think this one of the things I've noticed is, for example, humor. Humor a lot of time don't it doesn't translate well. Number one, either by language barrier, backgrounds, and you a lot of Western comics or Western movies. Sometimes I wonder, oh, it's comedy. Maybe I check out the genre online. I'm like, oh, it's comedy. I watched Adventure Time for years, and I liked it basically because of the character dramas and the action scenes. But then I found out, oh, it was supposed to be a comedy. I was like, oh, I had no idea. So things like that. Um, Celebrity jokes, things like that. We have different celebrities. So humor a lot of times doesn't translate too well. And it's, yeah, so it's kind of, yeah, affects the enjoyment of things in that line.
I see. It's true. Sloan, how do you feel about that?
So coming from, I mean, I'm in the United States, so I'm pretty much inundated by Western media and traditions. I think one thing that I like that is not popular at all and is even amongst like short fiction venues where I feel like they're okay pushing like boundaries, they really do not like passive protagonists. Like the passive character where things happen to them, which is really interesting because I feel like, particularly like in Japanese horror and folklore, it's all about causality rather than conflict. It's about things happening to a character that are out of their control, and also not about their motivations. You know, it's a very external and about events happening rather than like this character is taking an action. And that's just like, yeah, it's so hard to sell stories that like have that sort of element, but I find it so real, that passivity in characters, because a lot of the times when you're just trying to survive, like that's really all you can do is kind of like endure. But endurance is not like very sexy in like Western literature or comics, you know? Like so I think that's like a big trope that is not favored, but I personally like it.
All right. Thank you for sharing. I really do relate to that. Farid, would you like to share
Oh,
about like what is inaccessible? Yeah.
I definitely have to add for both of Sloane's and Moreva's points. For Moreva's point about the cultural misunderstanding between the genres in non-Western and Western media, I definitely think is a social linguistic and cross-cultural issue, and is actually very close to me as a linguist. My degree is in linguistics, so I definitely see the disparity between like certain things can't really translate well from the context of a different culture to another one. In fact, even with localization, it can be a very tough challenge in being able to translate something in the meaning that was intended in what they want to tell in their story. And to add on Sloane's point on like the genre of passive characters, it is definitely less popular in Western circles. But if you think about it in like non-Western circles, especially in Asian culture, as Sloan has mentioned, in Japanese, and especially in Malay and also Chinese culture, as well as I would know a bit from like the cultural osmosis of living here in Malaysia. Definitely, a lot of our stories revolves around things happening to us rather than we provoking them. And another thing I want to add about inaccessibility in Western media, specifically as a disability advocate, as a disabled person myself, in a more technical sense, definitely especially like Marvel comics and such, they have long texts of exposition that happen in a lot of the comics, and that is a struggle to a lot of different kinds of people, neurodivergent people such as autistic people who can get sensory overload, or people with dyslexia, and also in the for people who might struggle with trying to keep up with long stories to make heads or tails about it. And don't let me get started with like multiple timelines and alternate universes and multiple versions of characters. Despite it being one of my own favorite tropes of it, I definitely understand how it is not accessible, especially in cross-cultural and also English as a second language perspective.
Actually, that is a great jumping point, Farid. So I do want to say yes, Murewa, yes.
Yeah, while Farid was speaking, I kind of remember that from my research on a lot of African folk tales and stuff, is I found that a lot of them were cautionary tales. I think basically living in the jungle where everything around you basically wants to kill you. I think a lot of the old stories there were based on how you should not provoke danger of some sort. So
Uh,
it's usually cautionary tales, and it's stayed in our stories even till now. You don't have a movie or a comic book if there isn't a particular lesson to learn from it on how
mm,
to live your life better, which isn't necessarily something you see often in Western entertainment, where the protagonist could not necessarily be a moral character and could still get away with it.
Yes, that like thank you. That is yes. Okay. Yeah, I would like to segue into the technical aspect of creating comics and illustration. So, how do you feel about differences between Western and non-Western comics and illustration in regards to how perhaps like the techniques are used or how visual information is conveyed? Yeah, I'd like for us to talk a little bit about that, starting with Murewa.
Okay. There are different aspects to it. There's the comic book aspect to it. Comic books started a little later. Some of the first comic books to be introduced into Nigeria, I think, was by the co-creator of Watchmen, Dave Gibbons, who was to create an African character and stuff like that. So it kind of was introduced from the West, and gradually people picking it up and stuff like that. So for that, there hasn't been too much of a walk away from Western techniques technically. But that's changing a little bit more, but not too much. But from the illustration parts, yeah, that it's different entirely. A lot of artists focus more on abstract African patterns, and if you notice in a lot of traditional African art, um, a lot of human figures are caricatures of some sort, characters with extremely big heads, extremely big bellies, things just to kind of reflect in the inner attributes of that character being portrayed outwards. So you have a lot of more abstract arts, and you have different techniques like using African fabrics and stuff in your artwork, which still basically you try to bring out a shape or a figure out of abstract. So everything usually is more abstract when it comes to the illustration part, in contrast to in comic books, for example.
All right, thank you, thank you. Slow, would you like to add on to that with your personal experience and whatnot?
Sure. I think one big thing that I consider a lot of like American comics very literal. A lot of the way they depict as like their sequences are very like storyboarded. They're very like beat one, beat two. Things are very clearly like signified um like temporally, like in time. So like when there's a flashback, it's like, that we have color changes, we may have like stylistic changes to really signal that. But I personally think it's interesting, and in a lot of different cultures that we kind of have a more like amorphous sense of time, where the past and present are kind of intertwined. This is like in Hawaiian folklore, Native folklore, like in so many different cultures. This is time is way more like past and present is way more braided. And I really like trying to play with that in comics by making the transitions between like a character's memories and like flashbacks, making them less distinct from the present, because for me that signals that sort of like um not flatness of time, but like a coexistence of past and present. So that's one way I try to do it, by just like not making the differences in, you know, the future and your his like a character's background so different. Yeah.
That's really interesting. Do you have any examples of like that being illustrated like in a visual sense?
Yeah.
Does that make sense? Yeah.
Yeah, there's particularly in Love and Rockets, Jaime Hernandez. He has some he has such like a consistent style, and he very often will just from one panel to the next have characters be like you know, in their be like teenagers and then transition to like the far future where they're like middle-aged. And there's really no signal that that's happening. It's just a change of panel, but there may be certain things of like the same pose overlaid with the same characters but different. But there's no like visual or stylistic change, and there's no like acknowledgement maybe from the narrator. It's just very a smooth transition from past to future and back again.
Oh, I see. Okay. So it's not just the technical aspect, but also there's like differences in artistic, like visual shorthand, like tricks. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
All right, I see. Farid, would you like to add on to that? Like to, yeah.
For me, what I notice in the differences in Western and non-Western media in like the way they convey visual information is more of techniques of it, and I've noticed a lot of Western work, at least the one that I'm familiar with, tend to focus more on the face and the body form as they kind of emphasize more on the protagonist itself. But when I look at our local works here in the context of like Southeast Asian and Malaysian work specifically, a lot of our work here, both in illustrations and also in comics, convey the entire scene itself, because the backgrounds itself, the scenery itself is part of the story. If we can say an example of that would be like again Lat's work, where a lot of it is zoomed out and we can see the entire character interacting with the rest of the world with scenes of kopitiams and mamaks and of kampong sceneries, because that is as important as part of the story just as much as the character is. In fact, sometimes the scenery completely dwarfs the character, because that it kind of reflects on how a lot of, at least how our culture talks about how we are integrated with the world. And I think this is something that is shared in a lot of non-Western cultures, personally, because I feel like there is a stronger sense of community in from what I've noticed in non-Western cultures since early on versus the Western cultures, where probably it's because of the onset of capitalism that emphasizes on individualism.
I see. All right, thank you so much. For everyone's knowledge, kopitiams and mamaks are essentially like our small. How would I? Okay, you know what? Farid, do you have an explanation for that?
I'd say kopitiam and mamats are definitely they're types of restaurants, but the thing is kopitiams are more involved around Chinese culture and mamats are around Indian Muslim cultures. But each and every one of those eateries are also considered as community centers, because a lot of people convene and talk, and a lot of history happens in these places, that even certain kopitiams and mamaks are considered historical artifacts, and also it's integral to our culture to this very day. We have never seen them like go extinct because of how integrated it is in the Malaysian culture.
Mm. All right, thank you, thank you. Oh yes, Murewa, yes, please go on.
I think I understand what Farid was saying, because if you look at a manga series like Vinland Saga, even though the story itself is focused on Western culture, the Vikings, there are a lot of techniques, like she said, about the scenery is usually a focus, the community is usually in focus, and things like that. It's usually yeah, that's basically what I'm saying. A lot of the techniques used are similar more to, yeah,
All right,
unlike
thank you so
Western
much.
comics. Yeah.
Yes, thank you, Murewa. Okay, so I'd like to use that as a jumping point to more the technical side of things, like we're discussing now. What non-Western traditional art mediums do you think would be interesting to explore, or you have explored, in comics and illustration? Starting with perhaps Sloan.
I feel like that's really challenging. I'm actually thinking about like what Freud brought up, like expanding the scope of your compositions so that the character is not always like front and center. Like you're saying, that's a very like individualistic type of storytelling where everything's always like focused on that single character's like emotions and presentation. So I was thinking, like, do you think that's inspired by like Persian miniatures, like Indian miniatures, like you know that style of painting? Like it was originally for, I believe, like Indian royalty, where it's just like the almost like illuminated manuscript looking, but it's like a huge scene usually, you know, and the characters are just like one small part of like this of the scene. I don't know. I was just like really curious about that.
Okay,
Oh
if
yeah,
I'm
yeah, you
allowed to share
have, you
screen, you
have.
mean these?
Yes, exactly.
Oh, all right. Okay. Okay. That's cool.
Yeah, I really I like that idea of like both the density and like the highly designed borders. There's an artist that does this, Raymina Yi.
Yes,
Um
I was actually about to show an example from the
yes, yes.
the book that I have. Yes.
Yeah, totally.
Raymina
Um
is also one of my biggest inspirations as well.
yeah, their work is so good. I really admire how they're like adapting like the historical aesthetics with with their own comics, and it's just, yeah, it's really impressive. But that's like, yeah, that's the one that comes to mind from uh that I'm thinking about.
All right. Okay, thank you so much for sharing. Murewa, would you like to add on to the question on what non-Western art mediums you'd like to explore or you have explored?
There's one I would like to explore. It's mostly with African masks. A lot of African masks have a different way where they are shaped and structured, and I've not been able to see a lot of that in even African entertainments, and it's something I would really love to explore. There's an artist that has been trying a little to explore um, some aspects of it, Avandu, and I think it's, yeah. But there's an artist. His name is Avandu, and it's something I'm trying to share screen now. That's okay.
I'm not
So
sharing screen anymore, right? Just
Mhm.
okay.
Yeah, you know.
of the characters are usually, yeah, yeah, the face
Oh,
of the
Oh,
okay.
characters are usually shaped
that is
like that.
that is
So
very
and
inspiring.
one of the difficulties I think the art style might have is in facial expressions, and it's usually interesting to see how it tries to pull off facial expressions with the rigidity of those masks that are usually carved out of metal or wood or something. So it's something I would like to see more in African comic books, and yeah.
My gosh. All right. Thank you so much for sharing that. Thank you. So insightful. Farid, would you like to add on to that question?
To add as a jumping off point, through what it was points on African mass, there's also a lot of Jawa mass. I'm Malay Jawa, Malay Javanese. And like again, I'm gonna bring up Nizam Bachok's book where you can see all the mass in the background. Those are the different types of Javanese or Jawa mass that I take a lot of inspiration when I'm doing creature design, especially for illustrations for tabletop RPGs. And also, I take a lot of inspiration from, especially creature design, from, for example, wayang kulit. Wayang kulit is a type of shadow puppetry that is actually also practiced in Jawa culture and actually has some sacred ties to it as well. And a good example of that is, Jamie, can you bring up DK West?
Ah, yes, yes. I actually do have it over here. All right.
All right.
Oh, no.
Okay. A good example of that is like the character design of DK West from the video game No Straight Roads, by local company Metronomic here, and you can see how it integrates a lot of Jawa culture in like the textiles, the hair texture, the inai or henna on the hands and everything. And I take a lot of inspiration for that in both creature design and also character design as well, and especially to explore my own culture and to express it as well. And finally, another thing that I want to explore more in as an art form is batik textiles. Batik is a type of textile where like they draw the designs with wax, and it's very intricate, and there's multiple types of batik textiles both in flora and fauna design, and it can be utilized in both, of course, in textiles of clothes, but also in like abstract forms of flora and fauna that you can depict in your illustrations and comics as well.
All right. Thank you, Farid. Okay. I will dissolve my role as a moderator for a bit and would like to chill for a bunch of things that I know have featured this. Batik Girl is a short done by R&D Studio that actually does feature these things in batik as artistic inspiration. Oh no, I'm gonna turn off the audio. Okay. Yeah, like you can actually see it all in here. And yeah, it's one of the examples that I know have explored it. And also Cabaret, which is a game by Persona Theory Studios, a local, yet another local game company in Malaysia that have, not in addition to exploring local mythos and all that, like deliberately takes artistic inspiration from the cultures here. So I think, yeah, I would just like to share these as examples to support Farid's point.
Those are
Thank you.
gorgeous. I love
They
it.
look awesome.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. Okay. So, okay, I have another. Okay. So with that in mind, I think we can segue into the industry talk. What are some common misconceptions that people have about non-Western comics and illustration? I think I'll start with Slow.
Um, I'll speak to comics since that's what I'm most embedded in. Um, I think the main misconception is, I don't know, I feel like it has a lot to do with like abstraction and ambiguity. I feel like Western audiences don't like those elements in their stories. And I feel like so many other cultures like embrace that. They love like mystery, they love like philosophizing. And they like things that aren't spelled out clearly because they want the reader to like, walk away with a story that has left them with questions. And I think broadly, most Western comic readers don't want that. They want a hero's story, which is, pretty obvious by how inundated we are with like, Marvel, DC, Cape stories. Not that those are like bad, it's just we have a lot of those. And I feel like it's flattened our audience's taste a lot. So yeah, that would be one thing.
All right. Thank you, Sloan. I'd like to support that point by if everyone remembers that Pixar short like Bao, there was like a huge controversy, not to say huge, but there was a controversy when it came out where like everyone misinterpreted it as like there's this shot in like where the woman eats the bao that is obviously a representation of her son and growing up and all that, as to keep the son from not growing up like that memory. But everyone, but more from what I can see, the reception from Western audiences were like, why did she eat the bao? Why did she eat her son? And I'm like,
Like, you
okay.
don't have to take everything so
So,
literally.
yeah, I think that really does ring true in some certain cases. Murewa, would you like to add on to that, like common misconceptions people have?
I think it's less of a misconceptions or more like expectations. I think when people hear African comics, African entertainment, they automatically expect you to be in the savannah and wearing loincloth and going with a spear and trying to run after maybe a cheetah or something. That's usually a lot of people's expectations when they hear about African entertainment. So that usually makes things difficult. If you have a story set in an urban city or something, it's not African enough, that kind of thing. That's
Oh,
usually a common misconception. The
I see.
a common yeah expectation, yeah, kind of thing.
All right. Okay. Actually, I would like to ask you a little. I would like to ask you a little bit on that. So, would you say that your work tries to not adhere to this expectation?
Yes, and it's something that we see a lot even in African comics. It's usually um the creators succumbing to that expectation or trying drastically to oppose it. So you either see a lot of science fiction or you see a lot of fantasy based on that the African mythos. So there
Oh,
are two sides to it, people bouncing off that particular expectation. But for me, right now I'm trying to balance it. Even though yes, Newman is science fiction, so it's maybe me opposing that, and a lot of the stories are based in cities, but I still try to put in a little bit of, for example, African fashion and things like that into the story itself.
all right. Okay. Actually, then would you say that okay, I'm not very knowledgeable on this topic, but would you say that the genre of Afrofuturism has influenced your work in some way, or yeah, has it?
Um, it's a little complicated, but not usually. I think Inendi even kind of said our work is not even Afrofuturism, but African futurism. So I think there are more people kind of maybe even rejecting that name entirely and things. But usually there it's basically still sci-fi with a little African aesthetics, which uh but not really.
Okay. All right. Thank you for sharing. Farid, yeah, do you have any thing to add on common misconceptions people have?
I'm definitely gonna add common misconceptions coming from the non-Western folk themselves, especially from um Asian elders' perspectives and their expectations. A lot of them see comics as before this. I'd say like in back then, like they think that there is like limited to no how to say career or future in comics and illustration itself. And I think there's a lot of what a lot of Asian youth struggle with as well, especially with the emphasis on academic excellence and such. But I wouldn't say for everyone, but this is what I've noticed for at least me growing up and being someone who aspired to be an artist. And even then, the idea of comics were basically like newspaper panels or and perhaps usually seen as unintelligent even though like there is a scope of comic that goes beyond those. And I guess like now the perception of comics has shifted a little. People do see it as something that has a career to it, but there's still a lot of misconceptions such as like self-published work isn't really doesn't count, so to speak, or like it's not like it's not an accolade enough to be considered a real career. And like a lot of, I'd say, Western folks see non-Western cultures as a monolith because when they see Asian, they automatically think East Asian, South Asians, Southeast Asians, Central Asians. They don't think about those kind of people. And like again, I'd like to add on Murewa's point of like people's expectations and basically caricatures or stereotypes of people of color, and also just non-Western traditions that seep into the expectations of illustrations and comics. For comics, the stories; for illustrations, how it is portrayed. People would expect like Arabic artists to only do, say, calligraphy, um, because maybe they connect it with how Islam has its own rules on like depictions of people and idolatry and such. But that's not really the case. And also, there's the whole own voices argument as well that has been going around in comic circles, where Western publishers usually would only take up non-Western stories and ideals to basically try in a way, not in the best way, but it's well intended of trying to boost diversity, but they kind of like shoehorn all non-Western creators to do stories just specifically about their culture only, and they just kind of want to know about that only. It kind of goes to a point that can become Orientalism or fetishism of our cultures, because they're like, ooh, so what do the Japanese people do? Oh, do they wear yukatas all the time? Oh, what about the Africans? Is like Murewa say, oh, do they hunt cheetahs all the time? You know, that kind of stuff. Where they say like the path to hell is paved with good intentions. But yeah, that's what I would add to the conversation.
All right, thank you, Farid. Okay, we have 8 minutes left on time. So, but I would like for Murewa and Sloan both to add like themselves on what, yeah, based on Farid speaking about challenges, what is currently the biggest challenge in the non-Western comics and illustration industry at the moment, whether it be internal, like publisher stuff, or external, whether it's like suppression of freedom of speech or so on, that kind of thing. So, starting with perhaps Sloan.
I mean, do you mean like in the sense of like making like non-Western work? Because I am like in the Western
Yes.
industry. Okay, so like yeah, I would say that yeah, I would echo Fred in that it is difficult with publishers. They kind of want really they want diverse stories without actually having like diverse stories.
Yeah,
Like, they want like the set dressing, but they don't want the deeper like they don't want the deeper undercurrents of what that actually means, which is again like we you know we enjoy like ambiguous tales. We like stuff that incorporates like spirituality because that's the norm for a lot of us. Our story structures may involve like divine intervention, and that's accepted in different cultures, whereas in like American culture that would be like a deus ex machina, like, oh, that's not realistic. But for us, spirituality, and religion is normal, so that's an everyday accepted thing for us. But yeah, I would say it's difficult to not pitch that sort of thing, but get it published and not get it like get all the edges of your culture scrubbed down very smooth for a reader.
All
um
right.
yeah.
All right, okay, I see. Thank you for sharing. Murewa, would you like to add on to that?
I completely understand what Sloan is saying. It's yeah, it's can be like that in the western side of the border, because um a lot of things that make you African goes beyond the aesthetics of the story itself, but usually the core values and the techniques, and those are the things they still want to remain the same. But when it comes to over here in Nigeria, some of and a lot of African countries, but not all, the problem is usually on the technical side, which is distribution. Uh, we don't have comic book shops. a lot of people that read comics are scattered around, and transportation and a lot of things. So when it comes to actual hard copy comics, they are not very popular. They are actually very scarce. So it's usually mostly online, and that's has condensed a lot of stories that people can tell. So more and more comics in more of the comedic line, where you see them on Instagram in like little web comic slides and things like that. So the issue mostly is usually distribution and getting the news out there, even if you have a website that, okay, yeah, you can get your comics here and things like that. So it's still a pretty niche thing to be interested in the country at the moment.
All right. All right. Thank you. Thank you for sharing. Okay. Yeah, I'll toss it back to Farid for a moment, even though they have already explained quite a bit. But is there anything on would you'd like to add in regards to like internal or external challenges and so on?
I guess the final thing I'd like to add is definitely the logistics aspect as well. There's little to no specifically comic stores here either, and like game stores are also a few in between, and like a lot of our local artists and comickers are very undervalued by the local market. A lot of us have to look outside in order to get our work published. Like for example, Raymina Yi got her work published by a American publisher, and a lot of um the work here, especially with our small currency, also makes it hard to price ourselves in a way that we think that it's worth, because, well, there's not a lot of appreciation for the arts here, I'd say. And even then, when all of the local people's work are published outside, it will create a chasm in like the accessibility fiscally in order to access our own artists' work. For me to get a copy of Raymina Yi's copy of Macam Constantinia, I had to pay $30 for it. That is a whole 120 ringgit. That is 2 weeks worth of food for me. So by having the problem of like local communities not supporting their own artists, we have to resort to people who would appreciate us, but in that process kind of creates a vicious cycle of making our own work not accessible to our own people, and the
Yeah.
cycle continues. So I hope that our local communities can appreciate the arts more and make it more accessible for everybody here.
All right. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for everyone for sharing. All right. Okay, so officially I'm going to open up all questions from the audience now. But while the audience questions come in, I would like to just ask two questions to everyone. What question would you like to hear a specific panelist answer? Or is there anything that we're leaving out here that you want to address? Yeah, I guess whoever would like to go first, like raise their hands. Oh no, Muriel, what happened?
Oh no.
Okay.
It,
Would is there anything that you feel like we didn't address, Sloan, in your opinion?
Um, I feel like no, I feel pretty satisfied with what we covered. I mean, there's so many um avenues of story to explore, and I find that really exciting, and I hope like whoever's watching this panel later or now kind of goes and researches more about story structure. I'll drop some links. There's a really good blog post by uh Kim Yoon Mi, and they have a collection of story structures from around the world, so from like the Caribbean to like India and China, and it's really cool, and it's so inspiring. So I hope that will inspire people to
Oh my gosh. Yes,
yeah.
yes, please do, please do. All right. Farid, is there anything that you'd like to address, like additionally?
I uh I don't think there's anything that I would want to push now, but I definitely will be sharing some sharing who the artists that I mentioned earlier and where to find their work, and perhaps how to support them as well.
All right, okay. Murewa, I don't know if he can respond right now because the notice says there is a connection problem. Oh, we have. Okay, we will get back to him later if he's able. We have a question from the audience. Question, from Kayan. A question on accessibility. Would you consider a mix of free on the web and price content? I don't let Farid answer first.
That is definitely the approach that a lot of non-Western, especially on the global South, artists I've noticed have followed. But the problem with this is again comes the question of economics in the sense of okay, I want to price this online. I want to put it up online, but the only platforms that I can offer this on are American ones. I have to pay American price taxes. I have to price American price things, and I have to consider an audience whether I want to price this fairly for my own culture people or fairly on the international market. And what is even fairly when you have to think about like all these different aspects of it. What I think is best is actually to foster a community locally and like grow up from there, grassroots and this kind of stuff.
All right, thank you for sharing. Sloan, would you like to add on to the topic of accessibility in regards to pricing and free content?
I think Fred covered it. Like that's honestly the bet. Like there's so many difficulties trying to price stuff for everyone globally. So yeah, I'm gonna agree with everything they just said.
All right. All right. Thank you so much. Okay, we are a little bit over time. With that in mind, I think we can end the panel. But before we leave, I would like everyone to go around and sort of say what is the biggest thing that they want the audience to leave with, like in a single sentence, perhaps. Starting with Sloan.
Yeah, just experiment. Don't be held back by what you think are popular traditions, and just always be pushing and following your instincts, even if you think they're weird or unusual. Just yeah, follow your gut.
All right. Thank you. Farid, yes, please go on.
I definitely would say if there's one thing you want to take away from our talk here is to consider accessibility in different cultures, and this covers everything like from basically the idea of whole social linguistics thing from language to culture and just having a lot of empathy, not just for Western audiences, but also for your own community and also for yourself, and have that just go together, you know? But yeah,
All
that's
right.
how I would have put it.
All right. Thank you so much. Again, I'm not sure if Murewa is able to join us right now, but okay, just for the audience to know, we are all available on the Discord. So if you have any more questions to ask, we are available to answer them in Super D or whenever. Before we end the panel officially, I would just like everyone to drop let's say their portfolio or their Murewa is back. Oh no. I'm sorry, no, we're about to close, but I would like everyone to drop, let's say, a portfolio link or a link to their work in the chat or in the Discord before we end the chat, before we end the panel officially.
Yeah, we'll do. Yeah, you can find me at sloansloan.com and sloansloan on Twitter. Yeah.
All right, okay. Sloan's. Sloan on Twitter, is that correct?
Yeah, that's my username on Twitter. I can drop it in there. You don't Thank you for doing it though.
All right, okay. Murewa, are you available? I am not sure. Okay. Murewa, would you like to drop a link to your work inside the Discord chat? Yeah, or like, yeah, just drop it in the WebEx chat and I'll able to drop it because I have to end the panel soon. Okay. Yeah, I'm just waiting on Murewa now, if you can hear me. Okay. All right. We are 5 minutes over time, and with that in mind, I would just like to end the panel officially. Thank you, everyone, so much for their perspectives and their thoughts. It was great talking to y'all, and I hope the audience learned a lot from y'all, and hope to stay in touch, everyone.
Yay. Thank you so much. You're a great moderator.
Definitely give it that.
Thank
You're an
you.
awesome moderator.
Yes.
I do my best. Thank you. Thank you.